All right, welcome to our Bible study tonight. We're still looking at our study in wisdom and the things associated with wisdom. Tonight we're going to show something we're using actually something as a picture for this in the book of Proverbs. However, I do believe after we study, you'll see that I think that's how it's intended to be read. That there's a subject or an idea we're going to deal with tonight that's intended to be used as a picture, even though it is a very literal subject that's being dealt with. So I'll explain that in a moment when we get there. But I do appreciate you joining us. We're getting to the point where we're almost a year in this study. So we'll probably be looking to wrap it up here soon. I still have a few things I want to talk about, though. A few things are on my heart concerning wisdom and connected ideas. So we'll try to get all that in. But I think it's about 2 weeks from now, we'll have hit 1 year, or even maybe next week, we have hit 1 year in this study. So it's not 52 whole lessons in it, I don't believe, because we took several weeks off here and there throughout the year. And of course, Dr. Martin once a month speaking for us until his wife injured her leg. So we don't have 52 lessons in this study, but we have a year's worth of time in this study. So I appreciate those who've been a part of this journey with us and followed through this study as we've been doing this. And so we look to see where the Lord leads as we get closer to the finish line for this one. All right, so looking tonight at Proverbs, we're going to be studying the idea of avoiding temptation. And we're going to do this by looking at what I believe is one of the two intended personifications of temptation in the book of Proverbs. And one of those, if you've been following the study, you'll know what I'm talking about, is the froward man. The froward man is mentioned in Proverbs as being someone who tries to tempt and lie and lead us off of the path of righteousness and so forth. So there's a warning in Proverbs concerning that froward man and to be careful about listening to him. And we'll actually read some of those verses in just a moment. But we dealt with that when we were talking about frowardness and how that is an extension of foolishness, wherein you go beyond not being able to understand the truth and so forth and be able to use wisdom but to the point where you don't care about the truth anymore. And so we talked about frowardness and the froward man and also in our Sunday study about abomination some time ago. However, I think casually touched on the idea of the strange woman. Like, I don't think we went in great detail. Maybe I talked a little bit and showed a little bit of what I'm getting ready to say. But I thought it would be a good chance to go in a little more detail about that side of it. And so Proverbs chapter 2 is where we're going to start at. And I've limited myself tonight in my verses just to those with the word woman in them, while maybe there may be a passage I go to that has wife in it. You could look up wife and some other words like that as well that would extend this study more. But because I have several long passages to read and I have plenty to go through tonight, I limited myself by the book of Proverbs and verses that talk about women. And so because of that, that's why I'm limited to those verses, is just to keep the study within a reasonable amount of time. So Proverbs chapter number 2, and we're going to read, as I say, lengthy passages tonight from most of these places we're going. Proverbs chapter 2 and verse number 10 says, "When wisdom entereth into thine heart, and knowledge is pleasant unto thy soul, discretion shall preserve thee, understanding shall keep thee, to deliver thee from the way of the evil man, from the man that speaketh froward things, who leave the path of uprightness, to walk in the ways of darkness, who rejoice to do evil, and delight in the frowardness of the wicked, whose ways are crooked, and they froward in their paths, to deliver thee from the strange woman, even from the stranger which flattereth with her words, which forsaketh the guide of her youth, and forgetteth the covenant of her God. For her house inclineth unto death, and her paths unto the dead. None that go unto her return again, neither take they hold of the paths of life, that thou mayest walk in the way of good men, and keep the paths of the righteous. For the upright shall dwell in the land, and the perfect shall remain in it. But the wicked shall be cut off from the earth, and the transgressors shall be rooted out of it." So as you see, we start off with this passage saying, "When wisdom enters into your heart and knowledge is pleasant to your soul, discretion shall preserve thee, understanding shall keep thee." So there's very much an issue about wisdom and understanding is what's being discussed in this passage. It's something that God is showing us, that this is a matter of wisdom that needs to be considered here. And as we see that wisdom and understanding when they enter to our heart first. He deals with the froward. And you'll see the froward man and strange woman are very much connected because of the fact that they're very much two ideas or sides of how we are tempted. And they're very similar as you study them, but it's because the two types of temptation are very similar that are addressed by them. Now, that's not to take away from the fact that the clear biblical definition of lust in the New Testament is the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life. That is broken down into those three categories. These are two personifications. I don't want that to be mistaken that I'm negating or taking away in any way from those the list there in the New Testament. But as you look at this, we've talked about the froward man and how that his paths are crooked and twisting, and it's one of those things where like you start going down it and you don't realize, okay, all this is I'm lost. I don't know where I'm at anymore, kind of thing. You don't know how to escape. The strange woman is very similar in that. But so because we've talked about the froward man, I'm going to skip over that part of the passage and we're going to focus on the strange woman tonight as we look through and study some things about her going through and how wisdom would keep us from falling into this trap. Now, let me be upfront about the strange woman. And again, I'm sure I've talked about this either in church services or as part of this study. So I apologize to anyone who feels like they're getting a little bit too much repetition in this, that they've heard this before. There's good reason for that. But when you look at the strange woman, you have to understand that it's talking about a woman. I mean, literally, the idea behind the word is a woman who is not yours. So it's not your wife. It's not your spouse. It's not your wife that you should be looking to. That's literally the idea. And the contrast, you'll see that in Proverbs, especially in the next passage we go to in chapter number 5, is very clear that that's the intended contrast is your wife versus a strange wife, a strange woman. Be clear not to have the word wife there because it's not your wife. It's somebody who's not yours. And so that's the literal idea. What it's speaking to would be like an adulteress, prostitute, any of those kind of things. But then if you take it a layer deeper, it is a personification of what temptation is like. She's used to describe to us literally what an adulteress or a woman trying to lead you into lust and sin and temptation would be like. And truth is, ladies, you can flip that on the other side, and a man who's trying to lead you into lust and temptation and so forth would use a lot of the same similar tactics. And so the idea is someone leading you into that, but that's why it works as a personification of our own lust and our own temptation, because it's exactly what Proverbs is showing. Same way it personifies wisdom. It says, wisdom cries forth as your kin sister, as your sister, and, with knowledge as your kinswoman, and so forth. God does that quite a bit in Proverbs. He'll take ideas and concepts and personify them to the point where if you didn't know any better, you would think they were literally actually people. I laugh at that because I know somebody who read the passage about wisdom and tried to apply it to Jesus one time because they didn't understand that when it says in the beginning, I was with God, it's just saying that God's been wise from the beginning. God's always been wise. But they tried to make it about something it wasn't because of that. And so you have to be careful with that and understand that many times that personification is not meant to be taken literal. It's a literary device. You take things that are not truly living things, but you explain them through giving them characteristics of living things. So you do that all the time in literature and so forth. So it's not a strange concept. You see it quite a bit. The one that's really confusing, and I'm not going to get into it tonight because it's not remotely related to what we're talking about other than this one point, is death. Death is talked about almost like it's a living, breathing person in the Bible, when in reality, it's very much usually just personification. It's just talking about death as if it were a person so that you can relate and understand to the concept better. Now, saying that, this is what we're finding with the strange woman. Strange woman it's a little bit different because strange woman is a literal person, but because it's a literal person explaining to you, and God's explained to you how this person leads you into lust and temptation, it's also a personification of lust and temptation. So this one's a little more complicated because it's a little more layered than the other ones are. Now, saying that, we're told that if we have wisdom, understanding, discretion, all those things that we've been talking about and teaching, that it'll preserve thee, it'll keep us, it'll protect us from falling into these things. And so then we're given the description of the strange woman that it says it will deliver us from her in verse 16. And she is the stranger which flattereth her with her words. So we understand what flattery is, which forsaketh the guide of her youth and forgetteth the covenant of her God. So she is someone who has turned away from what she knows to be right, and forgets whatever connection or covenant she has with God. And again, this is pointing, if especially if you take this as a personification of your lust, it would be pointing to yourself, that in following after lust, you are forsaking the guide of your youth and forgetting the covenant of God. If you're taking it just the literal application, then yeah, it's talking about her. For her house inclineth unto death. So if you're going that direction, it takes you towards death, and her paths unto the dead. So, the people who are going there are dead. They're already destroying themselves. None that go into her return again. So it's one of those things, when you fall in temptation and lust, you don't come back from that. Neither take they hold of the paths of life. So they're not going to come back from this, as they don't return again, and they're not willing to do what's to take hold of the path, to do what they need to come back from this and to have life back again. That thou mayest walk in the way of good men and keep the paths of righteousness. So they're not going to take that, and they're not going to come back, so that they can walk as a good man and keep the paths of righteousness. And if you notice, I'm not spending a lot of time explaining the verses, because one is most of this is straightforward, and two, we're going to read multiple other very lengthy passages that say very similar things, and we'll probably address some of this more in those passages. So if you're not getting something, don't worry, you'll probably get it by the end of this. For the upright shall dwell in the land, and the perfect shall remain in it. But the wicked are, well, I've been going verse by verse. So, for the upright, those who do right will dwell in the land, and the perfect, those who are, you always have to be careful of the word perfect. Sometimes it's mature, sometimes it's complete, sometimes it's those who are doing what is right, what is proper. And it says that the perfect, and most likely, given the context that upright is the other half of the verse, should be referring to those who actually are doing what's right, will remain in it. But the wicked shall be cut off from the earth, and the transgressor shall be rooted out of it. So those who are doing wickedly, and those who transgress or break God's law, those will be cut off or rooted out, like how you pull up a plant. All right, so we've rushed through that to show that temptation is something that's very dangerous. It's something that is hard to come back from. It's something that many mighty men have fallen to, and we have to be very careful. And if we go through this life without wisdom, many times we won't be careful. Many times we just rush into stuff and think we're strong enough to handle it, and we don't realize the danger that we are putting ourselves into. However, if we have wisdom, knowledge, understanding, discretion, these things that are listed there, then what happens is we will step back and look at the temptations. This is very much in line with prudence. We'll step back and look at the temptation that is ahead of us and realize some of the consequences and things associated with it, so that we don't fall down in that path. Now, moving over to Proverbs chapter number 5, Proverbs chapter 5 and verse number 1, my son, attend unto my wisdom, and bow thine ear to my understanding, that thou mayest regard discretion, and that thy lips may keep knowledge. For the lips of a strange woman drop as an honeycomb, and her mouth is smoother than oil. But her end is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps take hold on hell. Lest thou shouldest ponder the path of life, her ways are movable, that thou canst not know them. Hear me now, therefore, O ye children, and depart not from the words of my mouth. Remove thy way far from her, and come not nigh to the door of her house, lest thou give thine honor unto others, and thy years unto the cruel. Lest strangers be filled with thy wealth, and thy labors be in the house of a stranger. And thou mourn at the last, when thy flesh and thy body are consumed. And they say, how have I hated instruction, and my heart despised reproof, and have not obeyed the voice of my teachers, nor inclined mine ear to them that instructed me. I am almost in all evil in the midst of the congregation and assembly. So when you look at this, you have to understand that what we're seeing, it's very similar to what we're seeing. Again, this passage will give you the contrast of why you should be content with your wife in your life, and the later half of it. And that's why this is actually going to be the real structure of our message. You can maybe consider chapter 2 as an introduction. I just started with it because that's the order in which the passages appear. But what you find here in chapter 5 is he is explaining to us how dangerous temptation is. That it's smoother than oil, and it drops like a honeycomb. So it's like honey dripping out of the mouth when temptation is speaking to you. And it's smoother than oil. It's something, slick or smooth, like we would say when somebody's a con artist or tricking you. Uh, but the end of it is bitter as wormwood and sharp as a two-edged sword. So it's cutting you both coming and going. You just don't realize it yet, maybe. And her feet go down to death. Her steps take hold on hell. Lest thou should ponder the path of life, her ways are movable, that thou canst not know them. So, what he's saying to us is that when it comes to temptation and lust, and understand that no man is tempted by God, every man's drawn away of his own lust. He's tempted within himself. Everybody's temptation, even if the strange woman comes to you and says, "Come lie," like we're going to see in some of these verses, it, the temptation comes within ourselves. We choose to be tempted. That's why one man may be tempted by that and another man not. While that same man who wasn't tempted by the strange woman coming to him, the literal strange woman, not what we're dealing with, coming to him and saying, "Come lie with me," one man may be able to have no problem with that, but that same man may be tempted by something else. He may be tempted by, I mean, I guess Joseph's kind of on my heart because he's in our reading to the Bible to the kids. That was my story I had to read last night in our morning Bible study we do as a family. That was my read. That's where we're at right now. We're in the life of Jacob at church, and we're talking about stuff leading towards Joseph, and talking about the life of Joseph in October. So in the church. So because of that, he's on my mind. But I think about this, that, Joseph was not tempted, as far as we can tell, in any way by Potiphar's wife. There was no temptation to draw him towards her. He easily pulled away from that temptation. However, when you look at Joseph, it would seem to me, reading the story, now you can disagree with me, but it would seem to me when you look at the story that there was at least a certain degree of temptation towards pride concerning his relationship with his brothers and so forth in the early part of his life. Now, I don't know that that would be true because you see that throughout most of his life, he's a very humble person, but maybe being sold into slavery helped to do that. However, the callousness with which he presents his dream, that clearly is a statement that they're going to bow down to him, and even his dad, when he comes to him and says, "Are your mother and I going to bow down to you?" To me, I see that there seems to be something there where he would be more quickly, even if he wasn't tempted by pride, it would feel like he'd be more quickly tempted by pride. Whereas the lust of the flesh doesn't seem to bother him that much. He's not chasing after fleshly pleasure, even though it's staring him right in the face and saying, "Come here." He's not chasing after material gain, even though it's being offered to him over and over again. And he's been everywhere he goes, he's put in charge of an entire kingdom, so to speak. And so you see that everybody has things that they deal with more strongly and more provoked by. But the thing you have to understand is all of them. If it's your pride, if it's the lust of the eyes, it's material gain and things of that nature. If it's the lust of your flesh, it's your fleshly desires. You want to be pleased in some way in your flesh, whether it's perverse, whether it's slothfulness, whether it's gluttonous. There's many ways in which your flesh tempts you. No matter what it is, there's always going to be this problem concerning the lust, any of our lusts that are coming to us, that when the temptation is speaking to us, it is like a honeycomb dripping. It's like you're watching the honey drip from that honeycomb. And I don't care if you like honey or not. If you watch when they take that little stick and they dip it down in the honey, the one that has like the ball at the end of it, and they swish it around in honey, they pull it out, and that honey drips off. It looks good whether you like honey or not. I mean, it's something that doesn't matter what your opinion honey is. In general, honey is something that we all can agree that there's a tempting look into it. It's something that we can at least appreciate the idea of what's being said here. That it's like watching the honey drip from the honeycomb. And it's just something sweet and appealing to you that you just want it. You have to have a taste of that. And her mouth is smoother than oil. So, she's very slick or smooth, the temptation, so that you're not realizing what the problem is, what the danger associated with it is. And then the worst part is her end is bitter. So it's bitter like wormwood, which is poison, and sharp as a two-edged sword. So when you have to understand this, what you have to look at is any temptation you're facing. So for example, let's say you're somebody who you're seeing others enjoying drugs and they're taking them, and you don't realize what's going on behind the scenes for them. You just see them at the party when they're having fun. And you want to take of that. Same thing, alcohol, same thing, any of that kind of substances. And you see it. when you're watching it, it's like, a bear watching honey drip out of the honeycomb, and you're trying to think of how to get to it without the bees. You're looking at it, trying to figure out, how can I taste of this? How can I have a part of this? And when the temptation is speaking to you, it's like it's smoother than oil. It's something that it's just slick and smooth, so that the words just sound beautiful. They sound right. And it dulls you to the point where you don't actually hear. I mean, oil's a lubricant. It keeps you from feeling the roughness of things. It makes things go more easily. It's why you run it in your car and so forth. So oil is something that makes things that are harder to do easier to do. That's something you have to understand. So the words of temptation come to you in such a way that it makes you ignore. It makes it easier for you to swallow the things that would be harder to take when you're actually looking at what it is you're tempted to do. It makes you start thinking, well, that consequence may not be so big. That problem may not be so big. I can probably handle this, and so forth. It makes it easier to swallow the dangers that come with something. And so you're looking at the honey dripping. You're seeing it as being easier to take because of this, and so it makes you not realize that the end of this temptation, if you go down this road, if you're looking at the stuff you shouldn't be, then the end of this road is going to be bitter like poison. Right now, it looks like it tastes good, but it's going to be bitter like poison, and it's going to cut like razor blades going down. It's going to cut all both sides of your throat as you swallow this, so to speak. So if you're taking drugs, that alcohol, when you look at it, you see the people enjoying, you see the commercials, you see the billboards, you see the parties, and it looks good. It looks easy to swallow. It looks like there can't be any negative side effects. But once you take it, once the taste is out of your mouth, what's left is a bitterness, a poison that you realize you've just ingested poison. And then there's a sharpness that you thought that this was oil, that you could take this and it wasn't going to hurt you, but now you've been cut on both sides as it went down. And you think of anyone who's addicted, and I'm using substance right now, but I can apply this to other stuff. Anyone who's addicted to things like alcohol, things like drugs, whatever, that from that high, all they can see is how good this is supposed to taste to them. It's not until afterwards that it comes crashing down and they realize, oh, what did I just do? But let me apply it beyond, because it's easy to apply it to the things that we look at as more extreme and more noticeable. Truth is, many of these things are far more extreme than we realize. But you think about it as someone who has struggles with food or something like that, with eating and eating too much. I know this from a lifetime of experience, that you're looking at that cookie, you're looking at that whatever it is, you think, oh, I want to try that. I need that. I had one bite already. It was so good. I can handle another. And then after you eat it, you feel like trash later. You're thinking, oh, what did I do? That was awful. Why would I do that? And you kick yourself. And that's temptation. It's the same kind of temptation. To be honest, if you're looking at it and understanding the context here, it's the same kind of temptation when a man is tempted to go after a strange woman. If you're looking at it in the literal application of the verses, the same kind of temptation that comes to a man who is tempted to go after a strange woman, and throw away his life, his marriage, and all of this. It comes from this place of that he's looking at this woman, and to him, she's like honey dripping from the honeycomb. To him, it's not so, it's not so bad. This is something that he can swallow this, but it's not until after, when the lust is satiated and you step back and realize that, what, this moment of pleasure was not what I thought. It wasn't the end all be all, what I thought it would be thing. And now I have to go back to my life, and either my life is ruined, or I have to go back to the misery of, what I've done, knowing deep down inside. And so you get broken in ways that you don't realize, because you've went after this temptation, and afterwards it's a poison. Afterwards, you thought because it was, let's say, dipped in oil, you could swallow it, but now it's cut the sides of your throat. And again, the literal thing here would be the strange woman. The easy thing to apply it to would be, substance abuse and things of that nature, but it applies to whatever it is you're tempted by. If we're looking still at the lust of the flesh, as a lot of this has been, then someone who's lazy, it's the same thing. People who are lazy, despise themselves. They hate themselves because of the fact that they've wasted their time. Now, they don't do it when they're wasting it. When they're sitting there and they're doing whatever they're doing to waste their time, whether it be this or something else, when you're wasting time, you don't hate yourself then. It's when you're done wasting time and now it's time to work and you've got 20 minutes to do 2 hours, 3 hours worth of work. Or you look up one day and realize that your wife is old, your children are grown, and your life has been wasted away on things that don't matter. That's when the bitterness of the poison sets in. So the truth is, all temptations lead like that. And again, so far we're looking at lust of the flesh, but if you look at pride, pride does the same thing. Your pride makes you get mad and respond in anger to people because you felt like they offended you and hurt your pride. And in that moment, it feels good. In that moment, it's like you're getting a taste of that honey that's been dripping out of the honeycomb. But when that pride and that anger wears off just a little bit and the edge is gone, then that's when you start to feel the cuts in the throat. That's when you start to realize that you just swallowed poison, and you realize that you have to live with the consequences of what you said when you were angry, what you said in pride, and so forth. So the pride of life also affects in that way. When you're talking about the lust of the eyes, those are things like material gain and stuff. And it's kind of similar to what I said about someone who's lazy. It's actually a little bit ironic, I guess, that the same issue a lot of times with the person who's lazy is what you'll see with the one who is so lusting after money and getting ahead at this life, is that they wait the longer than most of the rest of us to realize that they drink poison. What I mean by that is, like, as someone who, I especially like with sugar and stuff, eat way more than I should. I know myself, like, as soon as I've eat that cookie, because that sugar, that tastes, that's one of the best examples of this, because almost as soon as you've ate it, that taste changes, and you realize, oh, that was not worth this. I shouldn't have. I didn't need those calories. I shouldn't have done that. So you realize the poison quickly. Someone who is into substance abuse normally kicks themselves the next morning when they wake up with the hangover and the headache and all the problems. Someone who is into perverse things, same thing. As soon as they have, and just to be respectful and polite, when I'm about to say satiated the lust there, as soon as they've reached what they're trying to reach, let's say it like that, and all that chemicals go out of the body and all that temptation is gone, they realize that what they've done is bad. They kick themselves. They feel bad about it. They realize they've had poison. But the problem with someone who, again, somebody who's lazy or somebody who's lusting after material things, lust of the eyes, is a lot of time it takes you years to realize the poison that you've been drinking. And what I mean is someone who, for example, their whole goal in life, all they care about is money. They're trying to get ahead. A lot of times they won't realize what poison they've drank until one day they lose it all because the stock market crashes. A lot of times they won't realize what poison they have drank until one day they're 60 years old and have no relationship with their children or their grandchildren, and they finally step back because of something in their life. Maybe they got sick, maybe they're dying or whatever, and they step back and realize, I wasted this. It's all gone. I can't fix this. It's just too late now. And that's the problem. That's why it's such a poisonous thing, because many times by the time you wake up, it's too late. You drink poison, many times by the time you realize it, it's too late. Sometimes you can do stuff to save yourself from dying, but even then, a lot of times there's going to be consequences. I mean, I know somebody, and I'll leave his name out because a lot of people will know him, that when he was younger, he drank, I believe it was bleach or something of that nature, something that was poisonous for him. He drank a little bit of it, and so his mother responded quickly, was very smart because he was just a small baby at the time, gave him milk and things to help get, because that's a really good way to dilute it if you ever need to know a way to deal with it if you've ingested something that's not good for you. And so she gave him a bunch of milk and stuff, and it saved his life, got him to throw up, gave him milk, all those good ideas. But to this day, he still has problems with his stomach and with his throat because the damage was done, and there's nothing that'll undo that. There's no cure for that. And this will go very much in line with Sunday's message, so I better be careful how far I go into that line. But there are some things you can do that there's no cure for. And that's why it's so important that we understand this about temptation now, and that's why wisdom is part of this. That's why we have to have wisdom when we're looking at the temptations and things that come our way. That's why prudence is so desperately important to your life, so that you can foresee the evil and hide yourself before you ever get there. Because the evil doesn't come to you looking like evil. It doesn't coming, no temptation comes to you looking like a devil with horns and a pitchfork and all this kind of stuff. No temptation comes to you looking like a poisonous sword that's sharp on both sides that you have to swallow. None of it comes to you like that. Temptation comes to you looking like a honeycomb dripping honey forth. It comes to you smoother than oil, something that should be so easy to swallow, no problems attached. When the temptation comes to you, it comes looking beautiful. That's the thing you have to understand. The strange woman doesn't dress herself ugly to go out on the street. When she goes out looking for a man, as we'll see if we actually make it into the passage, she makes her bed nice. She makes herself nice. She has all her words and everything lined up, and she knows exactly what to say and exactly what to do. And you live in a day and age where that's more true than ever. And that's probably a hard statement to say because it's always been true. But I think in the sense that you can see it more now, that we literally have agencies. That's what ad agencies do nowadays. Nowadays is instead of trying to study the truth of what it is they're advertising, they try to figure out how to make it look like honey dripping from the honeycomb. That's their whole job. That's why, when it comes to the cigarettes here, they put the sticker, they put the pictures on there of the people with cancers because it's like, okay, for this one, the government decided they have to do that. But imagine if every product had to do that. Imagine if every product had to go and look up the negative side effects of eating this product or taking this product or whatever. And instead of just listing at the bottom, oh, yeah, the side effects of this medicine, which you're taking it to help you, to help thin your blood a little bit, which you can do with a lot of things. You don't have to do it with medicine. But you're taking it just to help thin out your blood a little bit. But the side effects of it are cancer, uh, mental disorders, early death, stroke. There's all these awful side effects. It's like I'm taking this medicine for something that's not a huge deal typically in the first place. A lot of times it's stuff that can be controlled with diet and exercise. Or even it's stuff that, to be honest, is not that big of a problem. Like you could live with this, but you're taking a medicine to treat it. That the side effects are million times worse than what the actual problem is you're trying to treat. In fact, that's why I know so many people. I'm not sure if it's as true here because I don't think they're as quick to give out medicine here as they are in America. Not to say they don't do it, they certainly do it. But in America, they give medicine. Oh, you sneezed? Here's a pill for that. Oh, the pill you took for sneezing now causes you to have high blood pressure. So here's a pill for high blood pressure, and it causes you to lose your eyesight. So here's a pill for your eyesight. But that one causes you to have backaches. So here's a pill for your backaches. Oh, but that one causes you to sneeze. And you see, you go in these crazy circles, and that's why I've known so many people in my lifetime who have put down the bags because if you have something life threatening, don't take that as advice. My brother has to take his medicine every day, or else his kidneys are going to reject. It's just something he has to do in this life, and I'm not advising somebody like him to put his bag down. He has to take those pills. But if you're somebody who's on pills for things that it all started with something that wasn't life threatening, but now you're getting worse and worse the more of them you take, maybe you should talk to your doctor. Maybe you should look at a possibility of stepping away. Because I've known a number of people who stopped taking all that stuff and they got better just because they stopped taking one thing to give you more side effects. Now, that's a little bit of a side note, a little bit, in fact, to be honest, it could go very far off the rails if we stay on that any further. But the reason I'm saying that is imagine if everything that you bought, everything that you dealt with, advertised what the consequences are. And in reality, everything that's sin, the consequences are going to be death in some form. It's going to be that it's leading you into death. It's going to give you heart disease. It's going to destroy your life. It's going to destroy your relationship with your family. I mean, just imagine if alcohol actually, to buy it, you had to realize, you had to acknowledge, you had to sign and acknowledge and that you realize that, okay, this is probably going to ruin my life. It's probably going to be addictive to me. I'm very likely to run on somebody off the road and kill an innocent person. If you had to go through all those things, it'd be a little harder for you to say, yeah, it's no problem. It's just one beer. It's just one thing. It'd be a lot harder to do that if you actually knew for sure what the consequences were. Now, the reason why that doesn't work as well as you would think it would is because people believe whatever they want to believe. And even if they know 100% that this is the consequences, that the wages of this, that where this is going to take me, that all of this is leading to some destructive path for my life, they don't care. Anybody who's ever went after the strange woman, he knew he was throwing away his marriage. He knew deep down inside that his kids were going to suffer, his wife was going to suffer. He knew deep down inside that his friends and family were going to be brought to shame as well. He knew deep down inside that he was throwing his life away. But that lust was so much for him, that his body was urging and pushing him so much that you have to chase after this, that he didn't care. And the same thing for everybody who's ever drank too much, everybody who's ever been addicted to drugs, everybody, that high just seems so high. That high seems so great that you lose sight of what matters. You lose sight of the consequences. And that's why it's so important that wisdom is brought into facing temptations, because otherwise you won't face the temptations. You won't overcome them. You won't run from them. You won't foresee the evil and hide yourself. You'll go down into those paths that are the paths of death. You'll go into that place where it says, that few ever return from it. That they go there until at the last they mourn, and their flesh and their body is consumed. We have to be willing to listen and to the reproof here, and we have to remove. That's why, like verse 8 of chapter 5 here in Proverbs says, "Remove thy way far from her, and come not nigh the door of her house." You ever notice when it comes to temptation and lust, God doesn't tell us to just stand and fight against it. He tells us spiritually to stand and fight against the devil, and there's some things we're told to stand and fight against. But when it comes to lust, God says, get away from it. Don't go near the road that leads to it. Don't go anywhere near the sin or the temptation itself. If you know you're somebody who's going to be tempted by something, then you need to stay as far away from that thing and put as much obstacles between you and that thing as you can. Otherwise, you'll fall to it over and over again for the rest of your life. Now, of course, there is truth in growing as a Christian and growing spiritually, and having a spiritual life as opposed to a carnal life will make a huge difference in all of that, because that's what Christ does for us. He helps us to not have to be under that bondage anymore. But part of the wisdom that in this is putting as much between you and that temptation as possible. If you know that there's a lion coming to eat you and your family, then you don't just open the doors and say, "Well, if God, if God wants it, it'll happen." That kind of mentality. You don't, "Oh, it's okay, it's just a lion." If there's something trying to get in your house and destroy your family, you shut the door, you lock it, you barricade it, you arm yourself, you get weapons, you do what you have to do to protect yourself. Wisdom would tell you to do the same thing. You get as far away and put as much between you, whether it's distance, whether it's barriers, whatever it is you have to put between you and temptation, you do it, because you don't want to fall there. You don't want to die. You don't want to be destroyed. All right, then Proverbs chapter 6. Proverbs chapter 6 and verse number 23. It says, "For the commandment is a lamp, and the law is light, and reproofs of instruction are the way of life. To keep thee from the evil woman, from the flattery of the tongue of a strange woman. Lust not after her beauty in thine heart, neither let her take thee with her eyelids. For by means of a whorish woman a man is brought to a piece of bread, and the adulteress will hunt for the precious life. Can a man take fire in his bosom, and his clothes not be burned? Can one go upon hot coals, and his feet not be burned? So he that goeth into his neighbor's wife, whosoever toucheth her shall not be innocent. Men do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy his soul when he is hungry. But if he be found, he shall restore sevenfold. He shall give all the substance of his house. But whoso committeth adultery with a woman lacketh understanding. He that doeth it destroyeth his own soul. A wound and dishonor shall he get, and reproach shall not be wiped, and his reproach shall not be wiped away. For jealousy is the rage of a man, therefore he will not spare in the day of vengeance. He will not regard any ransom, neither will he rest content, though thou givest many gifts." The question here that's asked, and it's extremely important, you have to ask yourself this, is, can I play with fire and not be burned? Can I play with this, whatever the temptation is that's trying to lead me there? If I'm going to be honest and look at this wisely, can I play with this and not be burned? And the answer is definitely going to be no. If you play with fire, you're going to get burned. You can practice safety as much as you want. It's like, everybody know who rides a motorcycle. They say it doesn't matter how safe you are, how good you are. Everybody's going to crash at some point. Doesn't matter. Everybody who drives a motorcycle will do that at some point. I think of fire. Maybe I think of it because of fire. Maybe because of welding being something that I care about. Maybe it's because I recently tried to start get back into welding some. But I think of welding. If you're going to weld, you're going to get burned. You can wear all the leathers, you can wear all the protection, you put the mask on, put your gloves, cover yourself from head to toe. At some point, one of those sparks is going to get past all of that, and it's going to burn, and it's going to hurt. I'll be honest with you, the more of the protection you have, sometimes the harder it is to get that spark out once it finally breaks through the barrier. The best thing to do is if you don't want to be burned, is stay away from it. I mean, I'll be honest, if you don't want to be burned, don't be a welder. If you don't want to crash, don't ride the motorcycle. You don't ride, if you don't want to crash a motorcycle, don't ride a motorcycle. There are some things that if you don't want to do it, the best thing you do is just stay away from it. And it's a simple thing. If you don't want to be burned, don't play with fire. Because if you go after temptation, it is a fire and it's going to burn you. It's going to happen. It is something that no matter how safe you are, how safely you practice, it happens eventually. Everybody who plays, I've known a lot of people in my lifetime who are self-professed pyromaniacs, and of course, they're not truly pyromaniacs. They're just people who like fire. 'Cause fire is a fascinating thing. I think everybody is either likes it a little bit or is scared of it. One of the two, typically. I'm sure there's exceptions to that, but in general, most people have some relationship with fire in that way because it's a fascinating thing. But at the end of the day, I've watched all those people who thought they knew how to play safely with it, thought they knew what they were doing. At some point, they get burned. Some of them learn their lesson with a little burn. Some of it learn it with major burns that they have to bear for the rest of their life. They carry scars with them forever. And so all of us have to understand that's where wisdom really comes into this. Wisdom allows us to understand that if you're going to walk on coals, you're going to hold fire in your bosom, close to your chest here. At some point, that fire is going to burn you. And that somebody who chases after, and again, he's using the literal strange woman. So I'll go through that first and then I'll show you the temptation. Someone who chases after a strange woman who is lust after her beauty, or when he sees her eyelids and the way she bats her eyes, it's enough to move him into temptation. It says, by means of a whorish woman, a man is brought to a piece of bread, and the adulteress will hunt for precious life. He's saying that she's trying to destroy you. The reason why she's flirting, the reason why she's flattering, the reason why she's saying this stuff is not because she wants to help you. It's because she wants to use you up. You are a substance to her, that she is trying to use you up and destroy you. So anybody who's ever facing temptation in terms of adultery, just understand that the other person doesn't actually love you. The other person is trying to use you up and throw you away. And at some point, you will get used up. It may take a long, long time, but it will get there eventually, because the person who's doing this is playing with people. They're looking at a person as a means to satisfaction, the same way a drug addict looks to a drug, an alcoholic looks to alcohol, and so forth. They're looking at you as a means to an ends, and when they get that ends and they get what they want, at some point when the high wears off, you're not going to be worth the trouble anymore. So they're using you up the same way a drug addict burns up a joint. It's the same difference for them. They may not realize it. They may not be as calloused in the way they see it, but that's what's happening. And so the warning is that when you have a temptation, that temptation, whatever it is, in this case, it matters that it's a literal person because it helps the illustration land harder. But the temptation, whatever it is, it's just using you up. You are a means to an end. You are something to be burned through. It doesn't care about you. Whatever the person, the person who's trying to offer you drugs, the person who's trying to get you hooked on something, they don't actually care about it. They're just trying to bring you down to their level. But then the other half of this is that he describes it as, he says something here is very important. And to me, this is really, really important for us to understand. He says, if somebody steals because they're hungry, nobody's going to hate him for that. Now, if you steal because you're greedy and you're selfish and you just break into somebody's house and take their stuff, yeah, people will hate you for that. But you have a man who is really down on his luck and his life is ruined, and he's starving, and he just comes to a breaking point and he steals because he's hungry. Nobody's going to hate him. The Bible still requires him to pay back sevenfold whatever he stole. All of that was the rules. That's fine. But nobody's going to hate him. There's a tremendous amount of understanding. And that's why even in courts today, a lot of stuff is taken in degrees of understanding based off of your circumstances, sometimes more than it should be. But one thing you have to understand is when you're just acting upon lust, nobody is going to be forgiving of that. Now, his illustration is that when a man commits adultery with another man's wife, that man will never forgive you. Doesn't matter what you do, because jealousy, the fact that you took something that was uniquely his and this was his right and you took that from him, he'll never forgive that. You can give all the gifts you want, you can spend a lifetime trying to make it up, but deep down, he'll never forgive that. It'll be a burning rage deep down inside of his heart because he has the right to be upset. He's not wrong. He has every right to be upset with what you did because that was his unique right. Now, that's a very important lesson for us to understand is that, yeah, there's understanding, there's mercy when someone falls because I was starving. I couldn't survive. But if you're starving because of lust, that's a different thing. If you're starving because I haven't had a high in a little while, I just need my fix. If you're starving because, in the sense of even, I mean, let's say you wouldn't think of this as starving, you're just so tired and lazy, you don't want to get them to do something, any of that kind of stuff where it's literally just about lust. It's not because of an actual need. There's no mercy to be found in that. People are not going to have mercy. People are not going to be understanding and forgiving of that. You are going to have to suffer with the consequences. People, that's why when somebody's a drug addict, as society, we try to be understanding and sympathetic because we understand that it's an addiction that got a hold of them. But in reality, many times the people don't get help because they're taught by society. And don't get me wrong, there are ways in which you have to help people and should. But I've seen so many people who stay in this because society tells them, well, you're a victim. This is a disease, and you can't help yourself. But you can. It's very strong and very hard, but you can. And the first answer is Christ, of course. After Christ, after you're saved, then you can get help from Him and get strength in Him. But you can. It's just many times people aren't willing to. And I'm saying that the level of mercy and sympathy and stuff you'll receive from people many times depends on whether you fell by accident, whether you fell because of some necessity, like somebody stealing to eat because they're poor and don't have anything, or whether you fell because simply of your own lust. It's going to make a big difference in how people view these things. And then I'm going to read Proverbs 7, and then I'm going to close on that because I'm out of time. We're not even halfway through our notes yet, so I guess we'll come back to this next week. But Proverbs 7 is the last passage I have to read about this strange woman. The rest of it is really just about women and how important it is that you choose right in this. And so I guess I'll make more sense of that in a moment or next week one. So Proverbs 7, I'll start in verse 4. It says, "Say unto wisdom, thou art my sister, and call understanding thy kinswoman, that they may keep thee from the strange woman, from the stranger which flattereth with her words. For at the window of my house I looked through my casement, and beheld among the simple ones. I discerned among the youths a man void of understanding, passing through the street near her corner, and he went the way to her house, in the twilight, in the evening, in the black and dark night. And behold, there met him a woman with the attire of an harlot, and subtle of heart. She is loud and stubborn, her feet abide not in her house. Now she is without, now in the streets, and lieth in wait at every corner. So she caught him and kissed him, and with an impudent face said unto him, I have peace offerings with me. This day I have paid my vows. Therefore came I forth to meet thee, diligently to seek thy face, and I have found thee. I have decked my bed with coverings of tapestry, with carved works, with fine linen of Egypt. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let us take our fill of love until the morning. Let us solace ourselves with loves. For the good man is not at home. He is gone a long journey. He hath taken a bag of money with him, and will come home at the day appointed. With her much fair speech she caused him to yield. With the flattering of her lips she forced him. He goeth after her straightway as an ox goeth to the slaughter, or as a fool to the correction of the stocks, till a dart strike through his liver, as a bird hasteth to the snare, and knoweth not that it is for his life. Hearken unto me now, therefore, O ye children, and attend to the words of my mouth. Let not thine heart decline to her ways, go not astray in her paths, for she hath cast down many wounded, yea, many strong men have been slain by her. Her house is the way to hell, going down to the chambers of death." I wanted to get this in here because this is one of the most important passages for what we're talking about tonight. Here you see it actually acted out. And that's why I like that in Proverbs, he typically will introduce an idea. A few chapters later, he'll build it up bigger. And a few chapters later, he'll build it up even bigger. In this case, he does it one chapter after another. But what you understand, or what you should understand when looking at this passage, is how crafty and cunning temptation is. That it comes to you seeking you out, hunting, lurking around every corner, decked and beautiful, so that when you see it, you don't see the consequences. You see the honey dripping from the honeycomb. And then the speech is smoother than oil. I mean, think about what she says to him. Oh, I've just come from paying my vows. And, I'm so determined on what we're going to do. I've already went and said, I made my apologies to God and took care of all this stuff. My husband's gone. There's nobody who's going to catch us. There's no consequences. Just come, just come. It says she forces him with her speech, because that's what temptation does to you. Most people, when temptation first comes, you'll think about it and say, I can't do that. But then something speaks up in the back of your head and says, oh, you can. But you say, no, if I do that, I'll hurt my wife, I'll hurt my friend, I'll hurt my health, I'll break my whatever. Something's going to get hurt by this. It says, no, 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 no. I've already taken care of that. It's not so, nobody will ever know. It's not a big deal. It's not so bad. That's the way temptation speaks to us. Deep down in our hearts, that's the kind of stuff we tell ourselves. You'll be careful this time. It won't be so bad this time. You'll maintain control this time. All those kind of stuff we tell ourselves to get through to the temptation, until at the end we don't realize that we are getting struck through the liver with a dart, releasing poison. That's what happens when you get struck through the liver, releasing poison throughout our bloodstream, and we're going to die in a painful, slow, agonizing death. That by the time we realize what's happened, it's too late to ever do anything about it. And he says we run to it like an ox going to the slaughter, or a bird going into the snare, and we don't realize we're destroying ourselves, and that people who go that way are going to be destroyed, and they don't see it. So wisdom, it's not about strength. He says many mighty men and many strong men have been cast down. I don't care what good self-will you have. You may have the best willpower of anybody in your family, anybody you know. It doesn't matter how strong you are. Temptation conquers everyone if you stay and fight. Wisdom dictates that you get as far away from her house as you can. Don't just say no and then let her keep talking. When you say no, get away from her. When you say no to something that you know you struggle with, get as far away from it as you can. Put as much distance and as many obstacles in between it as you can, so that you won't get back to it easily or quickly. That's what wisdom dictates when it comes to this thing of temptation. When it comes to the strange woman, is you're not going to beat it in your own strength, because your willpower and your strength is not nearly as much as you think it is. Her words are much more smooth, and that beauty is much more like honey dripping from the honeycomb than you realize. Temptation will conquer you eventually. Little by little, the words will wear you down and you'll give in, until eventually you find yourself being hurt and destroyed, your family hurt and destroyed, your life hurt and destroyed. And many times you're so broken by it when the temptation is done with you, so to speak, that you're never going to come back from this. Maybe the consequences are permanent. Maybe you're just so broken that you're not the person you used to be, so you can't come back from it. But there's a reason why he says few ever come back, that few ever take hold, that they're not willing to take hold on the paths of life again. Because when temptation's done with you, you're a wreck and you're a shell of what you used to be. You give up yourself. It uses you up like you would use the substance. It uses you up when you go into temptation. So wisdom is to not face it head on and fight it. Wisdom is to flee from it, is to get away from it before it destroys you. That's what wisdom would tell us about avoiding temptation. All right. I don't see any questions. I mentioned a minute ago I was about to finish, so I assume if there was questions coming, someone would have submitted one by now. I'm assuming I don't have any questions. I sincerely believe that this message is what a lot of people need, so hopefully people will take it to heart. Everybody needs this. We all face some kinds of temptation in our life. Maybe some people are more severe than others, but it doesn't matter. All of them have similar consequences and things like I've talked about tonight. So hopefully people will listen to this, take it to heart, and get some help from this lesson, and see what they need to get back from, to get away from some of these things that threaten to conquer them and hurt them. But as we get ready to close, I appreciate you being a part of the study. I appreciate those who've come in. I don't have many people in the comments. I have a number that says I've got a decent number of people watching. But I appreciate Sophania and Rebecca that you're at least commenting, and I know you're here. I don't know who else is watching, but I appreciate you being a part of it. And so, yeah, if you enjoyed this study, Sophania reminded me, go ahead and leave us an amen in the comments. If there's something in particular, I'll say this: I keep asking people to give suggestions. Nobody ever suggests anything on stuff. If you have something in Proverbs you'd like for me to talk about, if I can find a way to connect it to wisdom, I'll talk about it. Mention it in the comments, and if I can find a way to work it into this study before I close it, I'll do my best to get it into this study. Just make sure you get it in before I study. Okay, and Gail also mentioned she's watching, so thank you as well. But anyways, I do appreciate you being a part of the study with us. I hope that there was some help in it tonight for everybody. I encourage you, as we are getting closer and closer to the end of this particular line of study, to follow along with us as we'll come back to. There's some things I really want to say about wisdom directly. We'll come back to, I hope, if I can, get it worked in. But there's still a few more things in Proverbs. Let me throw this out there that I didn't finish. I finished less than half of my notes today. Now, my longest passages were all read, but my notes were only half. And so next week we'll probably be talking about, I'll try to tie it back to this as it was originally intended to be, but because it's a separate lesson, we'll probably be talking largely about the importance of having the right wife. Of having a good wife, because that's what we're going to use as the verses about a good wife to show why it's important to be content with the wife that you have. So we'll probably be looking at something similar to that. All right. I appreciate it. Thank you for being a part of it. I hope you have a good evening, and we look forward to seeing everyone at church tomorrow. Yeah, we'll close out the live stream.